Welcome back. So, Legendary Deirdre. It's pretty cool. She's got really good art, nice voice acting, all around good package. Can't really complain whatsoever. However, is she worth your orbs? Today, I'm here to answer that question. We already got the stats, everything was data mined, so we basically have everything ready to go. So I figured it'd be worth making a video on it. Anyway, no more introduction. Let's just get right into it with Legendary Deirdre. So Legendary Deirdre is a blue infantry mage on Earth Season, and she boosts attack to specific users that are blessed for Earth Season, as per standard with legendary heroes nowadays. In terms of her overall color and coverage, I find that she's actually really strong in her respective season, because currently there aren't any green Earth legendaries, which is really nice, and a good amount of them are dragons or have basically no res. The exception really being Legendary Julia, who is also an Earth Legendary, and I believe she's due for a remix soon, but that's aside the point. Basically, in terms of her overall coverage and usage in Earth Season, she'll actually be really good because she covers a majority of the Legendaries in that respective season. So in terms of just usability there, it's really nice. However, in terms of her overall performance, she's actually not bad whatsoever. She has a Slaying Tome with Dragon Effectiveness that also grants a guaranteed follow-up and debuffs the foe's attack and res by a ridiculous amount if all the conditions are met. She already gets the innate -6 attack and res for the first condition, which is really good. Oh, and I forgot to mention, she also disables any sort of adaptive damage, so she doesn't one-shot any dragon for some reason, like Legendary Fa, who has her Instant Miracle. Then she won't take as much damage back, which is really nice. But also, at the start of combat, if her res is greater than the foe's res, then she can inflict another penalty to the foe's attack and res based on 80% of the difference between the two stats. So basically how much more res she has over the foe's res, and it goes up to a maximum of 12. So from her weapon alone, if she can meet both conditions, she's inflicting -18 attack and res, which is really good, not only for just damage output and tanking mages, but because her defense isn't exactly the highest as is, she can actually take a hit when needed to, which is really good. She also has Circlet of Balance, which is basically a 2 cooldown iceberg, but it also has a miracle effect built into it that applies only once per map if she can meet both conditions. The first condition is whether or not her special or the foe's special is ready, or if the unit or foe's special is triggered during that combat. The second condition is also relatively easy. She just has to initiate combat, or the foe has to be 2 ranged, which means in some scenarios, if she has to take a hit from a ranged foe, she can potentially survive if she has her special ready, which is really good. However, I find that the caveat of just having it only work once per map is really weird, considering we've gotten units in the past recently actually, such as Ascended Celica and the recently released Brave Seliph, who can use the miracle as many times as they want, although they do have the 25% HP threshold, but there's always means around that. But as a result, I find that her performance comparatively to the other two on something like Aetherius Defense is a bit worse, since she can still get one-shot in the player phase by any sort of fast melee, which kinda sucks, but I feel like that's just me being a bit nitpicky. But even then, it's still a really good special regardless, because even if it loses the miracle effect, it's still a 2 cooldown iceberg, which is really good, albeit with only 10% less, but that's still 40% of the unit's res, which is really good, considering she has so much res to boot. She also has Still Water, which they've been pumping out a lot of lately. It's like the new attack speed push, but we'll see how far they go with that. It's not a bad skill whatsoever. We also have Attack Res Tempo, which is really nice for any sort of player phase nuke, as being able to guarantee your own special, as well as disable any sort of accelerated cooldown effects, maybe something from like Breath or Brave Lucina or whatever the case may be. That's really convenient, especially if it means having to take a hit when needed, especially in her case. And Attack Res Menace, which you can switch out, but it's not the worst by any means, as it does buff her visible res, which does help her check, as it is a start of combat check, which is really convenient. Overall though, I don't think she's that bad at all. In fact, I do think she's pretty good. In terms of power creep, I don't think it's really like the worst either. She seems more on the upper end of really good, but not necessarily like super high power creep broken. It just seems another new rendition of like a modernized Gen 7 mage, which is really nice. And overall, there is quite a bit you can do with her, although for the most part, she has her kit ready to go. If you just want to use her right out of the gate, you pretty much can. All you really have to do is give her Hardy Bearing. I find that her niche is definitely going to be best on Aetherius Defense, mainly because one of her conditions is much more reliable when she initiates combat, and given that one of her conditions for her miracle definitely heavily relies on initiating combat, although it can work against 2 ranged foes, it's definitely a lot more consistent on Aether's defense, which is why I do think that's where she will shine the most. Of course, you can still use her as a range specialist with the likes of Near Safe, but even with that being the case, I still find that she's going to be doing quite well on Aether's defense, which is what I built her around. If you just want to use her right out of the gate, you can pretty much just give her Hardy Bearing, so that way she could always hit first regardless of the foe, meaning that her damage output is going to be pretty consistent, and it does shut down Vantage strategies a bit more, especially the ones that heavily rely on being at 75% HP or lower. Although we do have newer units such as Brave Marth and Ascended Merida, as well as the recently released Brave Byleth, who all have their own Vantage niche, which is why I do think Hardy Bearing could actually prove to be pretty good in that scenario, especially if the goal is to shut down any sort of enemy phase strategy. Hardy Bearing is the way to go. However, in my opinion, I think one of the better things you can do is replace Menace with Times Pulse, and then give her an Impact skill. With Times Pulse in mind, she'll have both of her conditions for her Miracle ready to go out of the gate, as she'll have her special ready immediately. And when paired with Tempo, she'll always get 2 Circlet of Balance specials going, if the foe can retaliate, which is really, really good. On top of the fact that Mirror Impact will also shut down any sort of guaranteed follow-up the foe may have, so any sort of like slow, far save armor will definitely suffer as a result, which is really, really convenient since she doesn't have any sort of no follow-up effect in her weapon, and she will more than likely be going up against a lot of foes that have guaranteed follow-ups, because far save is really, really potent. That being said though, because she also somewhat relies on a guaranteed follow-up, you can always put her on a Catria Ball so she can always double regardless, or if you want to be a bit more secure, you can actually speed stack her a bit, so if she ends up going against hardy fighter units, they will disable her guaranteed follow-up. So, with a bit of extra speed from something like Attack Speed Oath 4 and Blade Session, she'll still be able to double a lot of the slower armors, which is really, really convenient. She will lose out on Times Pulse as a result, but you could always just give her Quicken Pulse, or you could even just swap out Attack Speed Oath 4 for Times Pulse. But I find that having a bit of extra speed just in case, since the foe will more than likely be able to stack speed a lot easier, is a lot more convenient, especially since she could also get the teleportation effect with Oath. So this isn't really that bad of a set in my opinion. But yeah, for the most part, she's pretty ready to go out of the gate, so you don't really have to change up much. If anything, I would recommend just getting Times Pulse on her, as having that along with an initiation will just automatically give her the Miracle, which is really, really convenient. But what if you wanted to just fodder her off? If the fodder seems tempting to you, especially since Attack Risk Tempo is now finally in the game, there are a few candidates you can actually give these skills to, both Attack Risk Tempo and Stillwater. If you want to give up Attack Risk Tempo to somebody, one of the best candidates in my opinion is absolutely going to be Young Soren, as he'll always be able to secure his own specials, which is really, really convenient, and you can still already do that with the likes of using Time Pulse and a 2 cooldown special, but with Attack Risk Tempo, he doesn't really have to worry about any sort of guard effects that will appear in the enemy phase from maybe stuff such as Stance 4 or Crafty Fighter, or even a Cadence support. And since his weapon does work off res differences as well, it actually pairs really, really well in general with what he can do, as he does have melee sweep in his weapon. It's really, really nice. And he could also potentially do the same thing as Deirdre, speed stack just a tiny bit, so if he has to go up against hardy fighter units, he could still double through them if he has the speed for it, which is really convenient. You could also give it to Tyne, who's pretty akin to the likes of Young Innis. I highly recommend putting this on a Catria Ball with a 3 cooldown special, so that way if they do end up trying to stall out her special and then remove it, and if the foe has hardy fighter, then the first hit that they'll basically reduce is not really going to be doing as much as the second hit would be doing with a special, and with Attack Risk Tempo, they'll absolutely be able to secure it, which is really, really convenient. You also have Loon, who has his Desperation for SETI effect. He definitely benefits more from having no follow-up, but being able to secure your own specials is also really, really convenient too. If you can provide him with some sort of no follow-up support, whether that's with Infantry no follow or Infantry speed tactic, as we just got from Brave Crom, then you can actually swap out his B slot for Tempo and then always secure 2 cooldown specials as long as he is able to make the Flashing Blade check, which he should be able to do, especially since he has penalty neutralization. And then beyond that, you could also give it to Garneth. He does have Fire Sweep for the most part in his weapon, so with Tempo in mind, he can pretty much just secure his own 2 cooldown specials with Times Pulse, and then just output a good amount of damage. Granted, he will require a fair amount of investment, because at base kit, it's not really going to be doing all too much, especially just since it's only a 10 attack speed boost, but with proper investment, ideal tempo, his damage output should actually be pretty good. And it's unfortunate to say that you can't get both Tempo and Stillwater 4 since Stillwater 3 isn't readily available or on any sort of demote. As such, if you wanted to only get Stillwater, then it isn't the worst trade-off by any means, as there are also plenty of candidates that could use it pretty well. For example, Emblem, who for some reason can get this. She basically shuts down any start of turn effects if her res is higher than the foe's res at the start of the turn, which is really, really good. So being able to bolster her as much as possible is really, really convenient. That on top of the fact you could always give her a healing special that scales off her attacks, so she's not losing out on healing potency as she would with stuff like Fortress Res, so it's not too bad whatsoever. And if you want to do something a bit more copium, you could always try and put it on Duma. So the goal here is mainly just to get Upheaval going, and basically check any sort of elements that aren't really properly invested or out of the gate. So basically you would want to give him any sort of res refined weapon with Stillwater 4 and Phantom Res, and hope there aren't any elements that can beat that res. And most proper elements can, but the players that pretty much just use her out of the gate without any sort of investment, such as Fortress Defense Res or Phantom Res, this will actually catch them off guard, which is really nice. You could also give it to Kanos, who is also a really, really good user of Stillwater 4 because his weapon scales off res, either his or the foe's, depending on which is larger. And more likely than not, it's going to be based on his because he gets a lot of res from his weapon as well. So with Stillwater 4 and then Null Sea Disrupt and Time Spells, he'll always have Ruptured Sky ready to go on the first 3 turns, which is really, really good. And you can just tank any sort of hits that target his res, as well as just output a really high amount of damage, because with Stillwater 4, he's reaching a really good amount of res, which will add as extra damage, which is really good. And then of course, you could also use this for any sort of AoE set. I think Reeve is definitely one of the better ones for this because he doesn't have to dump his res stat as much for Life and Death, which can absolutely help against the likes of Dragon Wall, which does scale off visible res. So with Stillwater 4, Special Spiral, Time Pulse, and then the Life and Death Seal, which you could probably swap out for Fury if you don't want to dump his res, although you do lose out on 2 attack. With this set, he will be able to actually output a fair amount of damage from his AoEs and basically shut down a lot of Dragon Wall users, which is really, really nice. He isn't really going to be checking a lot of the speedier units with damage reduction properties based on speed, because his speed isn't exactly the highest, although you can make it work. I think the units that already are stacking damage reduction already have enough speed to the point where they don't really have to worry about this. But even then, food for thought. And that's pretty much it in terms of her fodder usage. It's also worth noting that if you have a spare threat and attack res 2, you could actually snag both attack res menace and tempo, but no matter what, you can only get Stillwater 4. So keep that in mind if you do plan on summoning for her. But speaking of which, if you do want to summon for her, you also have to share with the likes of Legendary Fa and Legendary Mer. Legendary Fa is also an Earth Legendary, so if you're just looking for any sort of Earth Legendary, it's not a bad batch whatsoever, especially since it's 2/3 of a chance to get any sort of Earth Legendary. Not bad whatsoever. She also has Distant Stance. Although it's not necessarily the most coveted skill, you can still put this on specific units that would absolutely benefit from it, like Far Saves, if they don't already have Distant Counter or are ranged. It could be pretty nice. Or you can put this on any sort of mixed tank or omni tank, depending on what your preference is. You also have Legendary Mer, who I don't really think you should fodder off. You can actually fodder off for Defense Res Unity, which can be nice for just mixed phase tanking overall. But outside of that, I find that you're better off just keeping her and merging her, as honestly she's not even that bad of a unit. I don't really know how many units would really want a lot of the skills that she has, at least to the point where you would want to fodder her off consistently. Maybe there are a couple cases with Defense Res Unity and Dragon Ball, but for the most part I find that you're better off just merging her. And to be honest, she also scores really, really well. Both of them actually score really well because they have access to the Distant Counter Seal, which is a 300 SP seal, meaning that there's some of the highest scoring legendaries that we currently have in the game. So in terms of just overall legendary usage, I find that it's not really a bad lineup, especially if you are looking for a competent legendary unit for arena purposes. However, in terms of fodder, you could probably do a bit better. Deirdre's not bad whatsoever, although it's not necessarily a must-have in my opinion, as with the likes of the other two, but in terms of just getting either an Earth Legendary or a Legendary in general, they all score really, really high. So in my opinion, is Legendary Deirdre worth the orbs? Honestly, I don't think she's that bad. For what it's worth, she does have a good amount of value going for her. The units she's sharing with aren't bad if you're definitely prioritizing Arena, but it should be noted that we are getting a seasonal banner in a week, and these banners tend to last 2 weeks from, if memory serves correctly, so there's no reason to pull on this immediately. Regardless if this unit was like Omega broken, or whatever the case may be, you should always wait it out, because there's a good chance that there's something on the next banner that you'll want instead. And she's always going to rerun, so it's not really that bad whatsoever. Anyway, this has been my analysis on Legendary Deirdre and yada 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 yada. If you want to see more videos like this, make sure to like and subscribe. And until next time, I'll see you later.